It's official.
Raven Branwen is a very complicated, deeply misunderstood character that I feel both doesn't get enough credit for the things she does, and simultaneously gets far too much flack for things she either didn't do, or things she did do that got blown way out of proportion. A video like this has been done before. The YouTuber Eruption Fang made a 40+ minute breakdown of the complications surrounding the character from a development standpoint and a writing perspective. It's a great video I've been relying on for quite a while to help form my opinions and arguments for this character, but I think it's about time for this to culminate in a video of my own. Some points I'll be repeating from that video with my own take, but I've got plenty to say that either weren't covered or that I've got my own perspective on. For clarity's sake, I'll be looking at Raven as she's presented in the show and some common criticisms I see levied against her. I am pretty much of the opinion that most of Raven's actions are easily defensible if you think about it for more than a few seconds, and that much of the animosity towards her either stems from misinformation, the show pushing viewers towards that perspective, or fans projecting too much of their own experiences and feelings onto her to paint her in a worse light than is actually deserved. With all that said, this is my defense of Raven Branwen, RWBY's most misunderstood character. So, I was struggling with whether or not I should bring up arguably Raven's most significant act at the beginning or the end of the video, but I feel like since it's a question that will be lingering in the air if I hold off on addressing it, and will likely be the focus of viewers until I bring it up, I've decided to talk about it here, that being Raven abandoning Yang. Raven leaving Yang is the inciting incident for a lot of her characterization and creates the central motivation for her character as far back as the Yellow trailer. Yang's mom is absent from her life, and she wants to find her. This is explicitly told to us in Volume 2 during a scene with Blake and Yang. Blake is consumed with the idea of stopping Roman Torchwick after failing to capture him in a previous episode, and Yang tells her a story of a time she allowed her desire to find her mother put herself and her little sister Ruby in danger, surviving only because their Uncle Crow swooped in at the last moment and rescued them. She uses this to draw a comparison between her struggle and Blake's as a means of getting through to her, but it also serves to inform us of what we can expect from her character going forward. This is one of, if not the major reason Yang wants to become a huntress. On top of being a thrill seeker who craves action, becoming a huntress would afford her skills and connections she could use to eventually track down her estranged mother and finally get answers as to why she left. So here's what's interesting about this versus what we would see later on in the show. When Yang talks about her mother and the mystery surrounding her disappearance, she doesn't speak with any kind of animosity or disdain, just a sad curiosity. She wants to know why Raven left, but doesn't seem to hold anything against her just yet for having done so. This carries on into Volume 3 when Crow is asked to deliver her a message on Raven's behalf following a fight in Volume 2 where she stepped in to save her daughter's life. That message being,
"She wanted me to tell you that she saved you once, but you shouldn't expect that kindness again."
Despite such cold words, Yang still seems to carry the same sad curiosity as opposed to any feelings of anger, and if she did feel some kind of way, she certainly kept it hidden. This makes her eventual meeting with Raven all the more strange on account of the way she does end up behaving once she finally achieves her lifelong goal and stands face to face with the mother that left her. Now, while I said I would keep this video contained to the actions the characters take in universe, I feel like I need to dedicate at least a little time to dissecting fan reception to the character, and in particular, how the fandom seems to feel about this meeting. Many seem to side with Yang, often citing Raven's initial abandonment along with the later message she has Crow pass along as evidence that she never really cared about her, that she was merely waiting to fulfill an obligation she felt she owed her so she could finally wash her hands of her daughter once and for all and get on with the life that actually mattered to her, that being her own. The perception of Raven being a bad mother is a shell that's difficult to crack because the show itself has no qualms putting her down over this fact, reminding the audience over and over that she is a coward undeserving of sympathy because she'd rather throw someone else into the line of fire rather than take responsibility for herself and her decisions. An observation later thrown in her face by Yang herself during their final confrontation in the Vault of the Spring Maiden. However, these perceptions only make sense when any and all context is excluded from the conversation and we simply take the blanket statement, Raven left Yang, at face value. The first thing to consider is the position she was in at the time. I won't try to delve into it too much yet as I'm saving it for a later section of the video, but Raven, by the time she chose to leave, had lost the trust she had in the people around her. Her colleagues, her mentors, her friends. The only exception to this seemed to be Summer Rose, who we see she is still willing to lend her aid to when she asks for it. Considering this fact, it makes sense she wouldn't want to stick around the cabin house with Ty and the others, where Ozpin and his crew were a single letter or surprise visit away. On top of this, Tai Yang was likely still doing huntsman work around this time, as we get bits of dialogue in later volumes that imply he does still take missions, even as a single father of two. So this implies he was still very firmly on Oz's side, and hell, he probably still is to present day. So what does that mean for Raven Branwen? Well, she already had a life to go back to, one that she felt both safety and comfort in, likely due to her familiarity with that lifestyle. At the same time, I highly doubt she was ignorant of right and wrong by this point, assuming she attended and lasted the full 4 years afforded to a student and graduated, only to later become part of Oz's inner circle. She had a firm grasp of the traditional notions of right and wrong. I bring this up because it's relevant to her decision to leave Yang with Tai and Summer. A scene shown in Volume 9 tells us all we need to know about that decision.
You're better at that life. Better than I was.
That's really all the context we need to understand her decision, but let's get into it a little deeper. First off, I want to ask you all a question. Is a parent a bad parent simply because they choose to put their child up for adoption, or hand them off to a relative or otherwise trusted person? If the answer you came to was yes, I have to wonder why. If there is some moral law that says that under no circumstance should a parent ever give up the responsibility of raising their child themselves, then why do child services exist? If you ask me, there are plenty of circumstances that a parent might be otherwise forced or obligated to hand off the job of taking care of their child to someone else. What it boils down to is ensuring the best interests of the child in question, even if that means giving them up to someone better suited to give them the life you can't. Raven didn't trust the people around her, and she had already made the decision to return to the tribe. But on some level, it seems as though she's capable of understanding that the life of a bandit isn't something that should be put on a child. Maybe it's a little hypocritical, seeing as she was likely raised by the tribe and sees them as family, but after going through Beacon Academy and gaining friends and becoming a huntress, it's very likely she developed enough sense to see that the bandit life was not one for Yang. The only person she likely still trusted was Summer, and while we don't know when exactly Tai moved on from Raven and started dating Summer, it likely wasn't long after Yang was born. Tai was the only man Raven had ever cared for enough to fall in love with, and Summer was perhaps the most reliable person she'd ever known. So she left her most precious possession, her daughter, in the care of the two people she trusted the most. The people she knew could give Yang the life she thought she couldn't. And despite being all too happy to remind her of her failures, no one seemed willing to put in the effort to reassure her that she could be a nurturing mother if she just tried. All this to say, Raven isn't at fault for leaving Yang, and the anger pushed on her and the judgment she gets from Crow, Yang, and even Summer is frankly unwarranted, and just demonstrates a massive level of ignorance and insensitivity coming from them. Raven gave Yang the best life she possibly could, two loving parents, and a roof over her head, and even then, it's not like she was never there either.
A raven?
I've seen that bird before.
Raven was never truly absent from Yang's life. She was always there, watching over her, just from a distance. Forming a connection in secret, a strong enough one that she could use her semblance to open a portal directly to her. Now, whether you believe the theory that semblances are a manifestation of one's soul and reflect a core piece of the user's personality, almost like a cutie mark, it doesn't really change the fact that Raven's semblance is centered around forming deep bonds with others, intimate connections that allow her to go to them whenever she wants or whenever she's needed. A bond like that couldn't exist if Raven didn't care about Yang, Tai, or even Crow. And if you need more evidence that Raven cared about Yang, let's not forget about her supposed moral code that compels her to save someone at least one time in their lives. Now, I don't think this rule applies to literally everyone, but rather members of the tribe and close relatives and family. In other words, it's the connection that grants the privilege of being saved at least the one time. Now, I'm not saying this rule proves that Raven cared, because it's easy to argue she was waiting for her chance to fulfill this obligation and be done with it, but we know that isn't the case case, because even after she saves Yang from Neapolitan, another incident occurs that irrevocably changes Yang's life forever. Adam slices off her arm, permanently crippling her. Now by this point, Raven has already had Crow pass along her message of indifference to Yang, and yet, when the dust settles on the fall of Beacon, and Yang is left alone to sulk, Raven is the one at her side, albeit from afar. From the outside looking in spite of supposedly having already fulfilled her obligations to Yang as a parent, she still takes the time to check in on her, clearly concerned for her daughter's safety. So, while Raven certainly wasn't the kind and nurturing figure Summer was, to say she didn't care at all or that she was never around could not be further from the truth. One last point of contention I have regarding Raven's effect on Yang is how she's responsible for a lot of Yang's abandonment issues that manifest when Blake runs away. This is just blatantly false. Despite what the showrunners and the characters want you to believe, Yang never had any stunted emotional growth as a result of Raven leaving. In fact, most people seem to forget that Yang didn't even know Raven existed until after Summer disappeared, the very incident that caused Tai to, quote, shut down, which in turn forced Yang to step up and take on a motherly role for Ruby's sake. Raven did not cause these issues. Summer did. The supermom decided to run off on a secret mission nobody else knew about and got herself killed or whatever else could have happened to her, and it practically destroyed the family as a result. Raven is not responsible for the mess of a life Yang ended up having. She made the best decision for Yang, and it ended up blowing up in her face later. After Summer disappeared, she got the privilege of basically being martyred while Raven had to live on as the one who left, and had to soak up all the negativity for what eventually became of those she left behind, whether it was fair to her or not. So to be clear, I'm not saying she was somehow a good mother, I'm just saying that she didn't have a negative impact on Yang's development. She made the choice to not be a mother, and it was probably for the best. There's nothing wrong with entrusting your child's care to someone you perceive as better suited to the task. And there was no way Raven was going to stick around after everything that presumably went down between her and the rest of Ozpin's circle. And it's not as if she cut Yang out of her life entirely either. She does make an effort to get to know her later in life when the opportunity presents itself. When Yang finds her at the camp, she takes steps to be hospitable towards her, offering her food and a place to stay. The first chance they get to speak, and it's Yang who rejects her. This marks what I feel is the most damning piece of characterization for Raven: the hostility of her own daughter. It almost feels as if, because Yang suddenly has a grudge with her, we're supposed to as well. We're meant to support her hostile and combative attitude and relish in every eye roll and dagger-like stare she shoots her mother's way. Having Raven kidnap Weiss an episode prior was likely supposed to further this perception of her, but that was never the reaction I had. I found myself turning against Yang the longer this scene went on, because while Raven had certainly done herself no favors in turning Yang away when she realized what she was after, she still wound up inviting both Yang and Weiss inside to fill them in about the battle they were throwing themselves into. Yes, Crow had done something similar, but he only did it because the kids already knew something was up and likely wouldn't have kept trusting him if he hadn't, whereas Raven offered up this information freely and without malice. She sincerely sought to pass on the knowledge and experiences she had from her past onto her daughter for the sake of making sure she didn't fall into the same traps and make the same mistakes. She may have been harsh with her wording at times, but her actions are far more genuine and telling of her character than Crow's or Ozpin's. She even encourages Yang not to take everything she's currently telling her at face value, even though most, if not all of it, was objectively true. To summarize all of this, Raven Branwen is often touted as being a terrible mother who abandoned her daughter by the people around her, and the writers support this interpretation at every possible point, despite writing some fascinating nuance into this character that makes things impossible to be so black and white. Raven was never truly absent from her daughter's life, both before and after Summer vanished. Even though Yang wasn't there to see it, she still looked out for her. Additionally, when the time did come, she did the best she felt she could. She offered Yang food, a place to stay, and tried to impart her knowledge and experiences onto her. Yet despite all of this, she's still capable of recognizing that she failed to be the kind of mother Yang wanted. An insecurity we know about from Volume 9 is baked deep into her character and paints us a clear picture as to the reasons she decided to leave Yang in the care of someone else. In other words, She recognized her own failings and made the best decision possible for Yang, but still made an effort to look out for her in her own way. She obviously didn't do everything perfectly, as the flaws that do exist in her character still manage to sneak their way into everything she does, but she does try. The next thing I want to talk about is Raven teaming up with Salem's faction at Haven. This criticism, frankly, baffles me. Supposedly, Raven is a bad person because she aligned herself with the forces she'd spent so long running away from because she knew the battle was unwinnable, and Ruby's heroic speech wasn't enough to convince her to do the quote right thing. Also, that she was directly responsible for Cinder nearly killing Weiss because none of them would have been there if she hadn't negotiated the plan to ambush the Huntsmen and Huntresses in the first place. This is pretty stupid if I'm being honest. First off, just from watching the initial scene, it's blatantly obvious Raven was cornered and left with very little options. Yes, she could have fought Cinder and the others right then and there, but it would have not only inevitably led to her revealing she was actually the Spring Maiden, which was disadvantageous for multiple reasons, as it would surely have led to the deaths of multiple members of the tribe, if not all of them. After all, we know that a battle between maidens can be quite destructive, and on top of that, Cinder had the assistance of Watts, Emerald, and Mercury, all of which were directly responsible for the fall of Beacon and would have surely been problems in their own right. Cinder, Emerald, and Mercury together already had experience fighting a maiden, and Watts is a genius scientist who probably had more than a few gadgets to back up the three of them with. Otherwise, he could have just outright escaped and alerted Salem to what was happening, only widening the target on Raven's back further. Instead, what she actually does is formulate a plan that not only allowed her the opportunity to plan ahead and betray Cinder later on, but it also gave the heroes the chance to actually fight back. Yes, the plan was to take the relic herself, but it doesn't change anything. No amount of Crow or Yang telling her off is going to change the fact that Raven's plan was objectively beneficial to the heroes. In fact, I would go as far as to say it was the sole reason they managed to salvage the relic. The original plan, as explained by Arthur, was that they would simply take the Spring Maiden to the Academy, have Lionheart escort them personally to the vault, and claim the relic with no one the wiser. Crow and Ozpin may have been suspicious of Leo's intentions, but their focus at the time was on assembling a raiding party for the Branwen tribe. They would have been caught completely unaware by Cinder's team, and on top of that, Raven probably would have ended up dead, seeing as Cinder does end up betraying them herself, and we have no reason to assume she wasn't always planning to do so from the beginning. So not only would they have lost the Relic of Knowledge without even knowing it had happened, but Cinder would have likely acquired the Spring Maiden's powers as well, literally doubling her strength. So yeah, how about instead of giving Raven shit for being strong-armed into working with the woman she feared, and still finding a way to fight back and thwart their plan altogether, we give her well-deserved props for her ingenuity in a high-stress situation. Raven pretty much single-handedly saved Haven because she managed to trick Cinder's group into going along with a highly inefficient plan, all for the slim chance of taking a few of their enemies off the board. Raven should have a goddamn statue erected in her honor after all the finessing she managed to pull off, as she legitimately did more in a few episodes to stop Salem than the entire main cast did in 5 volumes. And no, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Just because Ruby says they did things others would call impossible doesn't mean they actually did. 5 volumes, and they've pretty much done nothing extraordinary by Huntsman's standards. Meanwhile, the Goat Raven put in that work and showed up everyone. Yang had no room to say shit after all the work her mother put in helping them.
You put others in harm's way instead of yourself. You might be powerful, but that doesn't make you strong.
Excuse me, the fuck did you just say?
So the next thing I want to briefly touch on is her bandit work. It's not super emphasized, but yeah. Her tribe was pretty much the reason Shion Village was destroyed. She claims she couldn't have anticipated the Grimm would set in as quickly as they did, and it could be true, but Raven's been doing this for years. It's more likely she just didn't care. And why should she? She's been doing this for most of her life. I mentioned earlier in the video that Raven later developed a more traditional sense of right and wrong during her time at Beacon, but after she went back to the tribe, she likely just put all of that development on the proverbial shelf in an effort to reclaim her old identity, probably in an effort to have some semblance of safety and security after having it shattered to pieces by Ozpin's lies and the truths she'd since learned about the world after having joined his ranks. That said, none of this excuses Raven's actions, but it does provide context for them. The things she's doing doing as a bandit tribe leader are wrong, but it's the only way she feels she can keep some control over her life, as she felt that the choices she made at Beacon weren't her own. As much as I want to talk about this more, there really isn't a lot to say about Raven's crimes as a bandit. We know why she did them before and after she went to Beacon. I don't think we really need to dwell on the matter, as there is one more, arguably more reprehensible act that she commits. Killing the Spring Maiden.
She was scared when we found her. Weak. No matter how much training I put her through, she never learned. She wasn't cut out for this world. And with those powers, she would have been hunted her entire life.
By her own admission, the previous Spring Maiden was a scared young girl by the time Raven and her tribe picked her up. She did what she could to prepare her for the world and the life she would have to lead, but ultimately at some point decided she'd failed and took matters into her own hands. Deciding nobody else could be trusted with the powers, she killed her and claimed them for herself. This is perhaps the worst thing Raven's ever done. More than leaving Yang, more than betraying Crow and friends, and more than laying an entire village to waste with little remorse. Raven took in a scared, frightened girl who likely had no idea what was going on, and took her life when she felt she wasn't up to her standards. The Spring Maiden likely had no information to go on to explain what was happening to her, given the only people who could have told her probably wouldn't have left her alone to be found by Raven and her tribe in the first place. Raven inserts herself into this girl's life and tries to help her develop control and understanding of her powers, but in the end, it wasn't enough. But this isn't a complete act of cruelty. Raven didn't kill this girl because she didn't like her. She did it because she felt she couldn't be trusted with the powers bestowed upon her. As we see in the conversation with Yang, she's invented excuses in her mind for why it had to be done. Why there was no other choice. She would have been hunted her entire life. I trained her as hard as I could, but it wasn't enough. We obviously can't assume too much because we never see Raven's interactions with the previous Spring Maiden, but I'm inclined to give her a small benefit of the doubt and assume that Raven's mistake was that she unintentionally set her up to fail. I believe Raven simply pushed her too hard, too fast, probably coming up with reasons why it was necessary. If she doesn't learn fast, it will put the tribe in danger. If she doesn't shape up soon, I'll look like a hypocrite betraying my survival of the fittest beliefs. So after some time of extensive, grueling training that the former maiden couldn't possibly keep up with, Raven decided enough was enough and took her life as what she felt was an act of compassion, already having built up enough of a rapport with her to know for certain that the powers would go to her. In other words, even if unintentionally, she took advantage of a young, naive, scared girl's trust and took her life when it was decided she was more of a hindrance than an asset. Also, she could feel comfort in the knowledge that the powers were now with someone with whom she could trust to wield them. Herself. This, I would say, is Raven Branwen's greatest sin. But even this, I feel, wasn't entirely her own fault. As is stated in her character card in Amity Arena, Raven felt that her life was always a binary, one choice, and a horrifying alternative. Choice was meant to be a gift bestowed upon humanity by the gods, but for Raven, it's only ever been a curse. For one reason or another, she's always had to make choices wherein the outcomes were either bad or worse, and so she grew to envy those who could make those choices without regret or hesitation, who could look back and know confidently that the choices they made were the right ones, because Raven was never confident enough to believe in that, only foolish enough to hope that they were. So that's my tirade on my favorite Ruby character, a deeply complicated, deeply flawed character whose execution contradicts what the show attempts to tell us through the characters at almost every opportunity. A character whose only solace is in an isolation she only pretends to desire, who feels so deeply that she portrays an aura of callous indifference in order to disguise it, but who can never truly escape the shackles of her emotions, and the connection she feels to the people she loves, even if they don't see it. I love Raven Branwen, and with Ruby Volume 10 finally confirmed, I hope to see her story continued and expanded upon. She has so much potential to be one of, if not the most interesting and complex character in the series. They just have to follow through with the building blocks they've set up, and show us that she's more than what everyone claims she is. Do you agree with my take on Raven? I know that I glossed over a few things, but feel free to let me know. And if there's something she did that I forgot or neglected to mention, tell me about that too. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one. So, thank you all for sticking around until the end of the video. I know that it's been, a while since my last upload, and there's a few reasons for that. One being just the general motivation to work on the video in the first place, the other being I've been dealing with a lot of financial problems in real life. So if you guys want to help me out, I do have a Patreon that's in the description of every video I've put out, and of course just watching my videos helps a ton too. Be sure to subscribe if you liked the content, and to those who've been waiting patiently for this, I really appreciate you guys, and I hope you're not upset that it's another Ruby video, as I've got a few more planned. It'll probably be a while until the next time I talk about Mortal Kombat at all, but just to give you an idea of what I'm thinking, I do want to revisit my Shao Kahn video. It's easily my most viewed, but it's also my weakest piece. Mainly because there's a lot of gibberish and random nonsense that didn't really work with what I was trying to communicate. So maybe one day I'll go back and I'll fix it up, and I'll try to make a better video covering the topic of Shao Kahn. Until then, there's more Ruby content in the works, and there's also some other things I'm thinking about. There's a lot to look forward to, and I hope you're all excited for it.
Outstanding.